Somewhere on the other side of the world, there is a wall so long that if you tried to walk along it from one end to the other, it would take you more than a year. Not a busy, rushing year. A slow, walking year. Day after day, one foot in front of the other, with the wall always beside you. And isn't that a wonderful thing to think about? Just that. A wall winding slowly across mountains and valleys and wide, quiet deserts for more miles than a person could comfortably imagine. We are going to wander along that wall tonight, very slowly, and hear the story of how it came to be. And because it is a very old story, told over a very long stretch of time, we are going to take our time with it too. There is no hurry. There is nowhere we need to be. China is a very large country. Perhaps you already knew that. Or perhaps you are just now letting the idea settle in. It is enormous. If you laid it over the top of Europe, it would cover almost all of it. And thousands of years ago, the land that would eventually become China was not even one country. It was many small kingdoms, each with its own ruler, its own people, and its own ideas about how things should be done. These kingdoms sat in the middle part of a great continent, and, to the north of them, just beyond the edges of the settled farmland and the river valleys and the quiet villages, there were wide, open grasslands that stretched away as far as anyone had ever traveled. And out on those grasslands lived groups of people who moved from place to place with their horses and their flocks. They were not farmers. They did not build towns. They followed the grass and the seasons, and sometimes, when times were hard, they would ride south into the settled lands looking for food and supplies. The people in the kingdoms found this worrying. And so, very naturally, the way people do when they feel worried about something coming from a certain direction, they began to build walls. This was a very long time ago, more than 2,000 years before tonight. More than 2,000 years before your grandparents were born, or their grandparents, or their grandparents' grandparents, going back and back and back until the numbers start to feel dreamlike and soft. The first walls were small. They were built by individual kingdoms, each protecting its own northern border. Some were made of earth, packed very hard and piled very high, like enormous garden beds stretching across the landscape. Some were made of stone, wherever there was good stone nearby. Some were made of wood and mud. They were not all joined together. They were not part of a grand plan. They were just local solutions. A bit of wall here, a bit of wall there. Each one built by workers who dug and heaved and tamped and stacked, one load of earth at a time. And then, something changed. Around 220 years before the year that would later be called Year One, a man came to power who was unlike any ruler China had seen before. His name was Qin Shi Huang, and he was the first person ever to conquer all the different kingdoms and bring them together under a single rule. He became, in other words, the first emperor of China. He was a man of very large ideas. One of his largest ideas was this: those old walls, the separate, disconnected walls built by all the different kingdoms. They should be joined together, extended, made into one single, continuous barrier across the whole northern edge of his new empire. Can you imagine being the person he told that to? Can you imagine sitting there, listening to the Emperor of China explain that he would like you to build the longest wall in the history of the world, stretching from the eastern sea all the way across mountains and plains to the far western deserts? The person listening to this probably nodded very carefully and tried not to show on their face how large the idea seemed. But it happened. Slowly, piece by piece, over many years, it happened. Hundreds of thousands of people were sent to build the wall. They were soldiers who were used to working hard and doing what they were told. They were farmers and craftsmen who were called up to work for the empire as a form of tax. Instead of paying in grain or gold, they paid in labor. And there were prisoners too. People who had done something to upset the emperor or break the laws, and who now found themselves carrying rocks up steep mountainsides in all kinds of weather. It was hard work. There is no gentle way to say that. Moving stone and earth and timber up into the mountains and along ridges and down into valleys was the kind of work that used every part of a body all day long. But here is something worth thinking about, something that softens the picture a little. Most of those hundreds of thousands of workers did not think of themselves as building something impossible. They were just doing the next thing. Digging the next shovelful. Carrying the next basket. Laying the next stone. And that is actually how the whole enormous wall got built. Not all at once, not in a rush, not in a single great burst of effort, but one stone at a time, one basket of earth at a time, day after patient day, one stone at a time. The materials they used depended on where along the wall they were working, and this is one of the more quietly remarkable things about the Great Wall. It looks quite different in different places, because it was built from whatever was nearby. In the mountains, there was plenty of stone. Good. solid, gray stone that could be cut and shaped and stacked into thick walls that would last for a very long time. The mountain sections of the wall are the ones that most people picture when they think of it. The sections that climb up steep ridges and curve along the tops of hills, like the spine of some enormous sleeping creature. But in the deserts to the west, there was almost no stone. There were no forests of timber to be had either. What there was earth. Dry, pale, sandy earth. And the workers there became extraordinarily good at using it. They would layer it up, pounding each layer tightly before adding the next, pressing and compressing until the earth became almost as hard as stone. This is called rammed earth, and walls built this way can be surprisingly strong, though they are softer looking, more rounded, more like something that grew from the ground than something stacked on top of it. And in some places, where the terrain was gentler and the ground was cooperative, they used bricks. Not the pale, sandy bricks you might see in old buildings nearby, but big, heavy, gray bricks, fired in kilns until they were hard all the way through. Now, the mortar. If you have ever built anything with bricks, you will know that you need something sticky to hold them together. Something you press between the bricks that hardens as it dries and keeps everything in place. Usually this is made from sand and lime. Limestone that has been burned and ground into a powder that, when mixed with water, sets hard as stone. The builders of the Great Wall used this kind of mortar too, but they added something else to it. They added rice, cooked, sticky rice, mixed into the mortar to make it even stronger. Glutinous rice, the very sticky kind, was boiled into a thick paste and stirred into the lime mixture, and the result was a mortar that gripped the stones together with remarkable tenacity. Scientists who have studied sections of the old wall have found this rice mortar still holding, still intact, after more than 1,000 years. Think about that for a moment. Think about the cooks who must have worked alongside the builders, enormous pots of rice bubbling over fires, the steam rising into the mountain air, the warm, faintly sweet smell of cooked rice drifting over a construction site high in the hills. Isn't that a funny and lovely detail? Rice. The Great Wall of China is held together, in part, with rice. As the wall grew, the builders added watchtowers. Every 500 meters or so, sometimes closer on difficult terrain, a tower rose up from the wall. Taller than the wall itself, square and solid, with a room or two inside where soldiers could shelter from the cold, and a platform on top where a watchman could stand and look out across the land. From these towers, the soldiers who were stationed along the wall could see for miles in clear weather. They could see the grasslands spreading out to the north and the mountains folding away to the south, and the narrow ribbon of the wall running east and west to the next tower on each side. It must have been a strange and particular kind of life, living in one of those towers. The wall would have been very quiet most of the time. Days would have passed, weeks, maybe months, without anything of note happening. A soldier might watch the same view morning after morning, the same hills, the same sky, the same seasonal slow change of color as summer turned to autumn, and autumn gave way to the pale, quiet days of winter. But they stayed. They kept watch. They kept the fires and the fuel and the supplies ready. Because the towers had a purpose beyond just looking out. They were part of a communication system, a signal system. If a watchman spotted a large group of riders approaching from the north, many riders, too many riders, the kind of riders that meant trouble, he would light a fire on the platform of his tower. A column of smoke would rise into the sky, visible for miles. And at the next tower, someone would see that smoke and light their own fire. And at the tower beyond that, someone would see that smoke and light their own fire. And so on and so on. Tower by tower, fire by fire, the signal would travel along the length of the wall. Not at the speed of a running man or even a galloping horse, but at the speed of sight. Within a few hours, a message could travel hundreds of miles. At night, they used flames instead of smoke. Great, leaping fires that could be seen from the next tower even in the dark. And the number of fires mattered too. Different combinations of fires and smoke signals meant different things. A small threat, a large threat, the direction it was coming from, how much help was needed. Can you imagine being a soldier far to the east, seeing a distant flame appear on a tower miles away, and then another, the message flowing toward you through the dark like a slow wave? We have been talking mostly about the wall of Emperor Qin Shi Huang. But here is the thing about the Great Wall. It was never really finished. Not then, and not for a very long time after. When Qin Shi Huang died, things in China changed. New rulers came. Different dynasties. The word for a line of emperors from the same family rose to power and held power for a while, and then gave way to the next. And different dynasties had different ideas about the wall. Some of them added to it, extended it, repaired the sections that had crumbled. Some of them let it slowly fade. Earth walls dissolved in rain. Stone walls lost their mortar and tilted and slumped. In some places, local people quietly borrowed the stones for their own buildings, a very practical solution to needing building materials, even if it did leave gaps in the wall. For hundreds of years, the wall grew and shrank and grew again, never quite the same from one century to the next, winding across the landscape in various states of completion and repair. The wall that most people picture today, the great, solid, beautiful wall with its towers and its wide walkway and its gray stone, was mostly built by a dynasty called the Ming. The Ming emperors came to power in the year 1368, and they had very strong feelings about the northern border. They invested enormous resources, and again, enormous numbers of workers, into rebuilding and extending the wall on a scale that had not been attempted for centuries. Ming dynasty builders were skilled and careful. They built the wall wider than it had been before. Wide enough, in many places, for 5 or 6 people to walk side by side along the top. Wide enough for carts to be pulled along it, carrying supplies to the towers. The top surface was paved with bricks set in careful patterns to allow rain to drain off to the sides rather than pooling on the walkway. They built the towers taller and more regularly. They added crenellations, those gap-toothed shapes along the top of a wall that look like a row of uneven teeth, the kind you see on castles, so that soldiers could shelter behind the raised sections and look through the gaps without being seen from below. And they built, and they built, and they built. For nearly 300 years, across the reigns of many different emperors, the Ming continued improving and extending the wall. When one section crumbled, they rebuilt it. When the northern border shifted, they extended the wall to follow it. The Ming Wall, in its completed form, stretched for thousands of miles. The section that tourists walk today, the part that appears in photographs, the steep climbing switchbacks, and the towers perched on dramatic ridges. That is the Ming Wall, built 600 years ago. Still standing, still stretching away over the hills in both directions. Now, a wall that long had to have gaps in it. Not accidental gaps, not the crumbled stone borrowed by locals kind, but deliberate, planned openings, gateways. After all, people lived on both sides of the wall. Trade happened. Silk and tea and porcelain from the south were exchanged for horses and furs and other goods from the north. Diplomats traveled. Monks and pilgrims crossed. Ordinary people moved from one region to another. The wall had great gates, enormous, imposing, carefully controlled gates where travelers would be checked before being allowed through. Some of these gates grew into busy trading posts, little towns that sprang up on either side of the opening, inns and markets and warehouses clustered around the point where the road passed through the wall. These gates had magnificent names. One of the most famous is called Jiayuguan, which stands at the western end of the Ming Wall, where the desert begins, and means something like the first and greatest pass under heaven. Caravans heading out along the Silk Road. The ancient trade routes connecting China to Persia and Arabia, and eventually Europe, would pass through this gate loaded with goods heading into the wide, dry, pale expanse of the Gobi Desert. Can you imagine being a traveler in those days, passing through that enormous gate and watching it close behind you, the walls stretching away to either side, and ahead of you just the desert, the road, and a very long journey? And then there is the other end, the eastern end. The eastern end of the Ming Wall reaches the sea at a place called Shanhaiguan, which means something like the pass between the mountains and the sea. Here, remarkably, the wall does not simply stop at the coastline. It extends out into the water, the last tower standing in the shallows, the great stone structure meeting the gentle lapping of the sea. So the wall, in its fullest form, truly ran from the sea in the east to the desert in the west. From sea to desert. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite something. Let us think for a moment about what daily life was like for the workers who built it, especially those working on the high mountain sections. They would have started work at first light, when the sky was just beginning to pale in the east. In the mountains, summer mornings are cool, even in warm months, and they would have eaten something simple before beginning. Perhaps millet porridge, thick and warming, or flatbread cooked over the embers of the night's fire. Then, the work would begin. Stone had to be quarried nearby, which meant chiseling it from cliff faces and outcrops, breaking it into manageable pieces, and this is the part that requires a certain respect. Carrying it up. Up steep paths, up temporary wooden ramps, up steps cut into the hillside, the heavy stone balanced in baskets or on wooden frames strapped to shoulders and backs. A skilled stonecutter could judge, just by looking, whether a piece of stone was good or flawed, whether it would sit well in the wall or crack under the weight above it. This was knowledge passed from older workers to younger ones, learned slowly and practically, the way most useful knowledge is learned. The wall was laid in careful courses, layers, each one set slightly back from the one below on the outside face to give the wall a gentle slope and help it stand firm against the earth, pressing against it from within. Corners were especially important and especially skilled work. A poorly made corner could become the point at which the whole section eventually failed. Up on the highest sections of the wall, the wind must have been extraordinary. You can stand on some of the mountain sections today and feel it. A steady, cold pressure from the north, the kind of wind that has been blowing since long before anyone thought to put a wall there. The kind of wind that makes you reach for something to hold on to. The workers who spent months or years at those heights would have known that wind like an old companion. They would have known which way it shifted in the afternoons. They would have known when a change in its sound meant a storm coming. They would have leaned into it without thinking while they worked, their bodies automatically adjusting to a force so constant it became background, the way the hum of a refrigerator becomes background in a quiet room. In summer, the higher sections would have been bearable, even pleasant in the evenings, with the mountains spread out below and the stars very close overhead. In winter, it is harder to imagine. Stone becomes brutally cold. Fingers and toes rebel against the temperature. The wind does not stop. Work slowed in winter, but it did not stop entirely, because there was always something to be done. Mortar to be mixed inside where it would not freeze, stores to be counted and protected, repairs to crumbled sections before more weather made them worse. The workers slept in simple shelters alongside the wall, or sometimes in the watchtowers themselves if there was room. They were fed by supply lines that stretched back into the settled lands. Carts and pack animals bringing grain and salt and preserved vegetables up into the mountains along roads that were often steep and difficult. Sometimes the supply lines were disrupted. Sometimes food was short. Sometimes the weather closed in and nothing moved for days. But then the weather would lift and the carts would come again and the work would resume. One stone at a time. There are stories, told for many centuries in China, that the spirits of those who died building the wall are still there, somewhere inside it. That the wall is not just stone and mortar and rammed earth, but is somehow made of the effort and endurance of all those people who spent months or years of their lives building it. This is a gentle thought to hold, not a sad one. Every wall that humans have ever built contains, in some way, the lives of the people who built it. The decisions they made, the skills they learned, the patience they practiced. The Great Wall just contains more of that than almost anything else. For a long time, after the Ming Dynasty ended, the wall was largely left alone. The people who ruled China after the Ming came from the north themselves. They were the Manchu people, who had actually pushed through the wall to conquer China and who had little reason to maintain a barrier that had been meant to keep their ancestors out. The wall was no longer a military priority. The garrisons were withdrawn. The fires in the signal towers went out. And slowly, gently, the way all old things slowly and gently return to the landscape if nobody tends them, sections of the wall began to settle and soften. Plants found their way into cracks between stones. Mosses established themselves on north-facing surfaces. In some places, trees grew right up against the wall, their roots finding the mortar, and gradually, very gradually, loosening it. Earth built up against the base of the wall until the lower courses disappeared, and it seemed to grow directly from the ground. Local farmers continued to borrow stones, as they always had, for houses and animal pens and the low walls of their fields. Nobody stopped them. Nobody was really watching. The wall became part of the landscape in the way old things do. Not quite invisible, but taken for granted. The background of countless lives. Something that had always been there, as far as living memory extended. Then, in the 1800s and early 1900s, something shifted. Travelers from distant countries began writing about the wall. Photographs were taken. People who had grown up hearing that China had an enormous ancient wall, but who had never seen it, suddenly could. The photographs were striking. These tremendous stone structures climbing impossible ridges, disappearing over the tops of mountains, stretching away into misty distance. And gradually, the wall was rediscovered. Not by the people who had always known it was there, but by the wider world, which found it astonishing. It is, of course, always slightly funny when something is called a discovery that was never actually lost. The wall had been there the whole time, and hundreds of millions of people had been living alongside it all through the centuries. But the world's astonishment was genuine, and it led to something useful: restoration. Beginning in the mid-20th century, sections of the wall were carefully repaired and opened for visitors. New mortarwork replaced crumbled sections. Collapsed towers were rebuilt. Paths and steps were laid to allow people to walk sections of the wall safely. Today, millions of people visit the Great Wall of China every year. They come from every country on Earth. They climb the steep steps to the nearest tower, catch their breath, and look out over the mountains, the wall curving away on both sides into the distance, and they feel, many of them have said they feel, this. Something that is hard to put into words, a kind of quiet awe. Not excitement exactly. Something slower and deeper than excitement. Because here is the thing about the Great Wall. It is not the work of one person or one army or one brilliant plan. It is the work of millions of ordinary people over more than 2,000 years doing an ordinary thing. Picking something up, putting it down, picking something else up, putting it down, over and over and over again, day after day, season after season, century after century. No single person could have imagined the whole wall. No single person ever saw it from end to end. The people who built the earliest sections had no idea that people would still be adding to their work 1,000 years later. The people who built the later sections may not have known, in detail, about the earliest sections that their work connected to. But they all did the same thing. They laid one stone, then another, then another. And over time, enormous, patient, slow time. The longest structure ever built by human hands appeared across the face of the earth. winding like a great sleeping thing through the mountains, stretching through the desert, reaching all the way from the sea to the sand, one stone at a time. Tonight, if you could drift very gently upward, the way imagination sometimes allows, and look down at the earth from somewhere very high and very quiet, you might be able to trace it. That thin, winding line across the great northern edge of China. Pale stone threading through dark mountains. A mark left by millions of hands, millions of ordinary days of work, across a span of time so long it makes everything else seem newly small. And somewhere along that wall, if the night is clear and the season is right, the wind is still blowing. The old, steady northern wind, moving across the stones the way it has always moved, unbothered by walls, unbothered by time. The mosses are there. The slow plants are still finding their cracks. A bird, probably, is perched on the parapet of some distant tower, looking north across the grasslands in the last of the evening light, quite unconcerned with history. And the wall just continues as it has always continued, patient as stone can only be, resting in the landscape it has known for 2,000 years, going nowhere, in no particular hurry, simply being the thing that it became through all those days of careful, quiet, one stone at a time work. The longest thing ever built. Held together, among other things, with rice. Isn't that something? Isn't that a good thing to carry with you into sleep? One stone at a time, and the wall goes on and on and on and on and on and on.